Hello and welcome. My name is Al Barrows, and this is UFO Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all the UFO, UAP news from everywhere and anywhere. Today, I'd like to relate something that I saw on Lately UFO Files. It involves a strange extraterrestrial encounter in Russia. From the 1940s up until early 90s, the United States and the USSR, two of the largest military powers on Earth, were entangled in a Cold War. The world lived under the very real looming threats of nuclear war as both sides accumulated massive nuclear weapon arsenals. And it's during this period of history that both America and the Soviets had very strange encounters with flying objects. One in particular happened in the USSR in the town of Voronezh in Yuzhny Park, where a UFO would land. 3 children were playing soccer when something in the air caught their eye. They were looking at a large pinkish sphere in the sky, and it was getting closer. As it descended, it gradually turned from pink to a deeper red, and its surface shimmered, almost like the air during a hot day. It was hovering at about 40 feet or 12 meters in the air. Underneath it, the grass swirled as though there were wind. It would briefly fly away, but it soon returned. By now, a larger crowd had now formed of about 40 people alongside the children. As the craft flew overhead, a hatch opened and something peered downwards at the children below. It wasn't exactly a person. The hatch closed, and this time, the UFO didn't fly away. It continued its descent. Landing gears emerged, and it touched down. A doorway opened, and from inside emerged 2 beings. One had a humanoid shape, stood 9 feet tall, had silvery coveralls, bronze boots, and a disc on its chest. Its head was more of a rounded lump at the top of its shoulders with no neck. It had 2 white eyes, and what appeared to be a third red eye between them. It was huge, really huge. The other had arms and legs, but had the shape of a large box adorned with what appeared to be dials. The crowd watched as the tall being said something, and a luminescent rectangle appeared on the ground. It spoke again, and this rectangle vanished. It didn't appear to interact with the box-shaped entity, which began to move around in what was described as a mechanical fashion. The crowd began to panic, and the beings simply vanished. They didn't return to their craft and take off. They just disappeared where they stood. 5 minutes had passed, and this duo then returned just as instantly as they had gone. But this time, the tall humanoid had in his hand a long tube. He pointed it at a 16-year-old, and the teenager vanished. The humanoid and the robot returned to the craft. It rose and then sped away from the scene. As it did, the teenager reappeared. So when this story reached the outside world of the Soviet Union, it really wasn't taken very seriously at all. It was pretty much taken as a joke. The TASS, the official news agency of the USSR, was taking the story seriously, though. The New York Times wrote that the TASS correspondent covering the case of the mysterious visitors to Voronezh seemed insulted that anyone would treat the story with anything but the full seriousness that it was given by the agency. But because of the story's strange elements, the response was almost instant ridicule. And it's here that the famous ufologist Jacques Vallée took an interest in this case. You might recognize him from his appearances on Jesse Michaels, Joe Rogan, and being the inspiration for the French ufologist from Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He's one of the biggest pioneers of serious ufology. He was outraged at how people were treating this case.
Everybody laughed. There was an article in the New York Times, laughing at those kids had seen a strange UFO and the creatures around it at Voronezh. Did the New York Times send somebody there? No.
Because this event didn't fit the boundaries of what people considered normal. It wasn't worth looking at seriously by them. And apparently its witnesses deserved ridicule. something that we have unfortunately seen time and time again, even in modern times. In a public statement, the Center of UFO Studies in Chicago denounced it as a hoax without even investigating it. The tall occupants described in the Varonese case did not fit the center's preordained patterns, and the case itself should be summarily thrown out. Someone would have to personally travel to the USSR, to Varonese, to investigate this case, and that someone was going to have to be Jacques Vallée. So being outraged at the reaction that the kids from Varonese were getting from the critics, Jacques Vallée went out of his way and traveled all the way to Varonese, Russia, to investigate for himself. Jacques Vallée met with various ufologists and researchers in the USSR, and right away he was overwhelmed. Not only did the craft land in Varonese, it left impressions in the dirt, which registered over 3 times the normal background radiation of the area, and multiple separate adult witnesses from the area saw the flying sphere around the same time from different vantage points. And 2 15-inch deep smooth holes were found in the dirt. It appeared that the occupants of this craft had perhaps taken soil samples. Maybe that was what the luminous rectangle was. But why would that be the case? Well, Usney Park, where all this happened, was built on top of a former landfill. And in case you're new to the UFO phenomenon, NHI seem to be heavily focused on 2 things: environmentalism, and they're also focused on nuclear weapons, and both seem to be present in this case. The Soviet Union was having many direct interactions with UFO craft during this time period, and the head of the Soviet Union's Committee for the Study of Anomalous Phenomenon told Jacques Vallée of 2 of these incidents.
It all began when we tried to understand the nature of certain underwater objects that followed our submarines. At times, they even anticipated our maneuvers. Initially, we thought they were American devices. One day, such an object came to the surface in a rather spectacular fashion. One of our icebreakers was working its way in the Arctic Ocean when a brilliant sphere craft suddenly broke through the ice and flew up vertically, showering the vessel with fragments of ice. All the sailors on deck and the officers on the bridge saw it, and it was hard to deny the hole in the ice. These phenomena were not limited to the Arctic. Our ships in the Pacific were also reporting flying objects, vertical cylinders. On October 7, 1977, a submarine repair ship called the Volga was at sea when 9 disc-shaped objects circled it. And all the time, the radio, the onboard communication systems, all the electronic equipment went berserk.
And these UFO interactions also included their nuclear arsenal silos.
October 5th, 1982, I was ordered to immediately go to the Ukraine and ICBM base. On October 4th, from 4 to 8 p.m., the base observed a UFO. At the same time, on the control panel, they received an order to prepare the watch of the ICBMs. The lights lit up and the launch codes enabled the missiles. Dozens of officers witnessed this.
It was their impression that the UFOs were trying to send some sort of a message such as, "This may be your most powerful technology, but it doesn't impress us."
And cities across Russia were experiencing very similar phenomena.
On June the 6th, 1989, in the village of Konstantinovo, schoolchildren would see a sphere land a quarter mile away and a similar being to the Varonese alien exit. And again, it and its craft would simply vanish. They saw 3 more spheres descend with some of their occupants also getting out. And in the city of Perm, a woman would see a dark being which was taller than a man, but with very short legs and a small knob for a head. It would emit a sudden bright glow, and just like Varonese, it was gone. And in the city of Chekchenko, now known as Aktau in Kazakhstan, part of the USS at this time, a large cigar-shaped UFO with taillights would fly silently into the clouds. These were only some of the many cases presented to Jacques Vallée. So after ending his investigation and deliberating with all the Soviet ufologists, Jacques Vallée had a lot to say about this case. He thought the Soviets did find real evidence that something did land and that strange beings got out. But beyond that, it gets complicated. Some of the story could have been accidentally altered by a bad investigation. one of which was using dowsing rods to try to find the path the aliens walked. And the second was including this symbol, only drawn by one of the children, but is now almost in every single popular depiction of this case. It's called the UMO symbol. In the 60s and 70s, allegedly an alien race calling themselves the UMO would send letters to various scientists and ufologists with alien philosophy and explanations of their technology, typed on a typewriter and colored with colored pencils. This was apparently their insignia. However, this is largely now believed to be tied to an alien-centric cult in Spain, believed by Jacques to be a hoax. Jacques thought that the researcher likely showed it as an example to one of the children during an interview, or perhaps even pressured the child to include it. But Jacques found that he had something in common with the Soviets. Jacques Vallée found common ground with the Soviets at the time about what these encounters actually could be. It was his theory on what these beings actually are. The Soviets seem to be on the same page, whereas a lot of Westerners are not. If aliens were worried about pollution in a park and wanted soil samples, they would probably land where no one could see them. So why were they seen at all in such a public way? So Jacques Vallée and the Soviets believed that these beings weren't physical aliens at all. Jacques Vallée doesn't believe the idea that these beings are real aliens like Star Wars or Star Trek who take ships to Earth and interact with us. What we're seeing is some kind of larger complex consciousness, he believes, interacting with us, purposely deceiving us about what it really is, but also trying to instill specific moral and cultural lessons to humanity. And many human myths may have been former forms that had chosen to do exactly that. And the form it has chosen might just be E.T. The Soviets and Jacques agreed whatever this was, it was changing its form constantly. The 1989 Voronezh UFO incident is widely considered a mix of youthful imagination, media hype, and potential mass hysteria, rather than an actual extraterrestrial landing. However, I think it can't be totally dismissed because it's still considered a significant event in Russian ufology. And secondly, Jacques Vallée certainly took the children's testimony seriously. My name is Al Barrows. This has been UFO Disclosure. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.